So Florida is a state that does require a photo and signature ID in order to vote in person. However, there's an exception, and that is if an individual does not either have one of the now 12 forms of identification or forgets it, then that individual can vote what's called a provisional ballot, which will then be verified as long as the person was eligible to vote, voted in the correct precinct, and their signature matches the signature that's on file with our office. Then that ballot is counted by the canvassing board. The list of acceptable photo and signature identification has expanded. It used to be 9, and now it's 12. And the Florida legislature during the last legislative session expanded the list to include Veterans Administration cards, U.S. Department of Veterans Administration cards, a concealed weapons permit issued by the state of Florida, and the final is a employee ID of a government. So if you're a federal government employee, a county, state, local government, if you have an identification badge that includes your signature, your photo, then that is those 3 types of identification are now added to the list of 9. So now where there's 12 separate forms of identification that you can present when voting in person in the state of Florida. All right, Florida is what's called a closed primary state. This is a question I get fairly often. So what is that? First of all, what does that mean? And quite simply, when there's a partisan primary contest, say the United States Senate, United States Congress, state legislature, county commissioner, constitutional offices like sheriff, etc., where you can run with party affiliation. You can run as a Republican, you can run as a Democrat, you can run as a Libertarian. Then the primary election, which are held in advance of the general elections, if there's more than one candidate in that particular political party that's running, then the registered voters in that particular political party get to go to the polls during the primary and decide which of the nominees that they would prefer to go on to the general election. And so when that happens, that primary is closed to people that are registered to vote in that particular political party. So if you have 3 Republicans running for the nomination for United States Congress in the August primary, the Republicans would go to the polls and select from those 3 to choose which of the preferred candidates, and whoever got the plurality of votes, doesn't have to be a majority, but just one more than the next person, then advances to the general election. And what it means is closed is that you have to be registered in that political party in order to vote in that partisan contest. And that registration has to happen no later than the voter registration deadline, which is 29 days in advance of the primary election. So in other words, you can't go a week before or the day of the election and say, well, I'm going to change my party affiliation and I want to change from party A to party B so I can vote in this contest. You can do that, but it has to be well in advance, 29 days in advance. And we do see people change their party affiliation in advance of primary elections. There are, in some primary elections, there are nonpartisan contests. For instance, in this upcoming election, we'll have a statewide referendum, a constitutional amendment. All voters, regardless of party affiliation, will be able to participate in that. We've got a municipal office in the town of Century that'll be on the ballot. We've got a school board office that will be on the ballot. Those are all, we run as nonpartisan, so all voters, regardless of party affiliation, even though it's on the primary ballot, will get to participate in that election. And then there's another exception, which we have again in this election in the county commission contest, and that's what's called a universal primary contest. And this was an exception that was written into the state constitution several years ago, which says even though we have closed primaries in the state of Florida, if at the end of qualifying there's only members of a single political party that are qualified for that office, in other words 5 Democrats or 3 Republicans and that's it, then in the primary, because that's when the race will literally be decided, all voters regardless of party affiliation can participate in that election. As to why Florida is a closed primary state, because the state statutes, the election laws of the state of Florida, there's a specific provision that makes it such. It's not a decision that we make, whether you agree with it or don't agree with it. It's the legislature writes the laws that pertain to this, and any change in that would either have to come through the legislative process in Tallahassee or through a constitutional amendment either brought by the legislature or the citizens of the state of Florida.